NFL playoff windows potentially closing, and we're going to parallel that to dynasty teams. And do our windows close or open in certain spans of time? That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, did the Bills' windows close? Because you alluded to the fact on Twitter, and I'm sure it was not the friendliest of watch for you on Sunday.
Yeah, I think the window's shut, and I discussed it a little bit on Twitter about really the way that you can contend. There's really three ways, right? You can get a quarterback on a rookie deal and build around him. You can do what the Saints did and draft a 2017 draft class, and even that didn't get it done for them with a veteran quarterback on a veteran deal. Or you can do what the Rams did and basically just go for broke and sort of mortgage it all for the future, mortgage the future for it all now, right? But that's an extremely high variance type of deal. And so this is kind of what you see, right? And I keep going back, and I always think about, that 13 seconds last year against Kansas City. And I think it's really instructive for us because when you look at these things, like they close a lot quicker than we think, right? You look at that moment, and I always go back and think about when Oklahoma City had Kevin Durant, Russell Wilson, and James Harden, right? And it was June of 2012. They walked off the floor 1-0 in an NBA Finals, and 3 first ballot Hall of Famers never got any closer to a Finals. And it's crazy that, like, when you think about that, they lost 4 straight and then never got back. And and then for the Bills, like, this is a good lesson for us. Like, they get to 13 seconds away from beating Mahomes in Kansas City. He goes down, leads them on a charge, and they go down basically in 2 plays, kick a field goal. They win a field goal toss, or they win the coin toss, go down, score a touchdown. The Bills come in the next year, actually play pretty well, lose an inexplicable game to Miami, and then 2 inexplicable games to the Jets in Minnesota. They actually go to Kansas City and beat Kansas City, control their own destiny, and DeMar Hamlin gets injured. And that causes them to basically no longer be able to get a 1 seed. And the consequence of that is that they have to play Kansas City in round 2 instead of playing Jacksonville, right? Jacksonville, Kansas City got away with it with Mahomes getting injured because they had to play Jacksonville. Cincinnati probably beats them, right? If Mahomes is playing on one leg, and the Bills, could have maybe got away with a lesser game against Jacksonville, and that's it, right? And now all of a sudden, like, you look at who's going to be gone, right? It's all the free agents. They're going to lose Jordan Poyer. They're going to lose Tremaine Edmonds, Roger Saffold, one of their guards is as a free agent. Dane Jackson's a restricted free agent, and they're over the cap. So they don't really have an easy fix for any of this stuff. And so I think, like, when you look at this, like, one of the lessons that I take from that is, like, things could have gone really differently, right? Like there's a chance that they're back-to-back Super Bowl champions if 2 or 3 different events break differently. But, like, the windows can close really quickly. And I think this is especially true when you got star running backs. Like, you have to capitalize on Austin Eckler type seasons. You got to capitalize when Josh Jacobs hits big. Like, you have to make a profit those years, because those can be really, really short windows. It fortunately has been a 2-year window for Eckler, but it can be really, really short windows. And we've seen that with, like, Taylor and some of the other guys. Like, those windows are a lot shorter than we ever expect. And I think for the Bills, it's probably closed.
Yeah. Just a comment on the NFL part, and then we spin it to Dynasty, is you mentioned just when you start having someone like Josh Allen escalate in salary cap carnage there. And it's really just, you got to have the perfect storm to end up winning. And we haven't seen that much in terms of paying the big quarterback, the big salary. So you have that window. Burrow is still on that window, and the Bengals are seeing the benefits of building the team around him. And so you really have that first 3, maybe 4 years of a quarterback of hitting early and then building around quickly and making a run. And Eagles also in that window. So it's no surprise. We got 2 teams here late. And then also we've got, I guess the perfect storm of team where they're scheming it up with Brock Purdy. So you have, you have 3 of the 4 teams. Then you have Mahomes, who probably could put a team on his back, being a supermax, but now he's on one leg. So that's going to be tough to put anyone on his back. and get home against a team that is built the other way with the lower salary quarterback and the super team, if you will, built around him. And it'll be interesting to see again. I mean, enjoy these heydays, Cincinnati, because in a couple of years, you get Jamar Chase is going to have to be paid. Tee Higgins is going to have to be paid or not. And Joe Burrow is going to be paid. What does the skeleton look like at that point? And I love what you said about the running backs, because we need them. It's like that a few good men, right? You need us on that wall, basically that you need the big running back, whether it's weeks, months, or seasons. But being able to predict that on who's going to be healthy at the end, we talk about the risk factors of acquiring those running backs for the run. And some people acquire them in August. And it's like, well, you don't need me in August. You don't need me on that wall in August. You need me on that wall in December. So that's really, getting, and we talk every season. It seems like there's a handful of players, and you can't always predict the position, but there's a handful of players that come from deeper than they should have for the monster year. And you better have one of them. You might have two of them. And those are where the championships come from. And you can build a great team around them. But I think the parallel you're drawing, which is, you got to have the perfect storm. If Von Miller stays healthy, if this was really their chance, a little 2-year windowette into Buffalo possibly having a Super Bowl or two. And Dynasty kind of works the same way, where you can have a good infrastructure, you're a good team, but you need some bounces. And part of that bounce is you've got to have someone that comes from the waiver wire. You got to have someone, a Geno Smith that came from the waiver wire when you're waiting on Deshaun Watson, let's say, or Russell Wilson or Stafford didn't work out for you in Superflex, but you had Geno Smith as your QB7, and all of a sudden it's a proxy. Everything worked out just fine. And I think, having that storm, and we talk about injuries too, right? I mean, you get the injury at the wrong time, all of a sudden you lose, like in redraft, you lose your first round pick in October. Well, it's tough to overcome that. We're not talking about getting a running back 18 performance out of your first round pick. We're talking about just you don't even have them. So you kind of having to gain that back through accrual of 2 or 3 things going your way overall in proxy. It's like the Moneyball thing, right? We're going to recreate him in the aggregate. So we can't get Giambi. Giambi's gone. So I think that we have to look at all these different prisms, and the NFL obviously has a little tighter constraints than we do in Dynasty, but in terms of the population and the way they team build. But yeah, I think the getting the running back performance at the right time, also insulating yourself so that you can benefit from those big time performances at the big time positions. You have to get that perfect storm, and that's what makes Dynasty Championship so special.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been thinking too about, like, you just think about like premium positions and like how important it is to sort of be optimized toward, really, basically giving yourself kind of the best shot. And, one of the things that I keep going back on is like thinking about different like team building strategies, right? So like you look at some of the things with Buffalo, for example, like one of the criticisms I think is that that they don't have sufficient skill positions, right? But when you actually go and you look at it, you look at some of these things, and last year they basically doubled down on defensive end, right? Like that's what they did in the first 2 rounds. Like you look at where they spent their premium picks, it's been in the right direction, right? This year they went with a cornerback and a pass catching running back, right? Like they've sort of aimed in the right way. They were for a while taking running backs, taking off ball linebackers, those sorts of things that are historically bad bets to take. But now they've actually taken the right ones, and they just haven't worked out, right? Like Rousseau, Von Miller gets hurt. Who knows if Rousseau comes along better, right? Some of their other guys, like things haven't necessarily worked out for them. Epinesa, some other guys like that, they traded a first round pick for Stephon Diggs. That's probably, Ed Oliver was undersized. That's maybe a concern that you could go with there. You sort of look at all those, but like they've sort of directionally spent in the right spots. I think it's a lesson for Dynasty, but they just haven't hit, right? But I don't think it's right. Just because you haven't hit doesn't mean that you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. It just means like kind of keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully at some point it'll break for you. I think that's a good lesson. Like that, they need one of those classes where 4 or 5 things go right for them to really sort of turn. They need to draft a Hall of Famer or two, right? That's what happens when you get a quarterback on these expensive deals. Like that's how Dallas, can have an elite defense, because Micah Parsons is playing like a Hall of Famer in a rookie deal, right? Like that's how you have to outperform. And I just think like you can take from this lesson a couple of things. A, that the windows close faster, but B, like you can still kind of directionally spend and directionally do the right deals that don't work out. That doesn't mean, you just throw it out. It means you just keep doubling down and hope that things break better for you in the future.
Well, and I think NFL-wise, it's a reminder that there's 32 teams, and they're all paid to go for this one goal. And I would say without fail, they all view, especially once you get to the playoffs, if they win the Super Bowl, like you get to the end and you feel that it wasn't a good season. You feel like you had more in the tank. You felt like this was your year. And yet you get to the playoffs and we're talking about 14 teams, almost half the league, have a chip in a chair. And, Jacksonville, I'm sure they thought they had a chance, and the Giants, they probably felt they had a chance. And so regardless of what we were kind of talking about, oh, no chance, just whatever, so it's such an overrated playoff team. Well, you're in the dance, and some of the teams we mentioned won a game. So you certainly are riding the tide of momentum. And I was thinking in Dynasty, as you were talking about just the right process, and I was thinking back to rookie drafts, the same sort of way of getting bang for your buck. And that isn't always making the pick. That could be trading the pick, but going through the right process. And sometimes you just come up, wrong. You just get the injured guy, or you just, it was the right process, the right pick. And for everyone where you're like, oh, fading first round profile here, got some upside here. Sometimes that turns into Josh Allen. Sometimes that turns into, is it Daniel Jones? That hasn't quite worked out, for example. A different prism of what is the right process, with a certain pick in a certain range and there's a certain positional premium. That's what that looks like, on one side or the other per se. And then, about in general, like, well, if you're going to draft a rookie quarterback, always, like, for me, one of the key things is ask yourself, with this rookie pick, 101, 107, 205, whatever it is, ask yourself, if I just go into the market of the other 11 teams, 13 teams, 15 teams, what does that get me if I'm trading for quarterback? Can I get something better? Because what I hate, one of my biggest pet peeves is when people say, well, I need quarterback and I have these rookie picks, and they're so tunnel visioned into, and I had someone today, they're like, well, if I trade away Dak, the discussion was trading away Dak, and then like, well, then I would do this in the rookie draft to draft the quarterback. And it's like, that can't be the cascading plan of team building.
That's a horrible plan.
Right. It's not trading away Dak and then trading some rookie pick to get a quarterback, or drafting a quarterback at 105. So it's just, that's what we mean by like the whole addressing need in a draft. Like, this is ancillary. This is drafting a farm system type stuff, like the Justin Jefferson outcome or the instant impact guy. Just to give one example. So Trevor Lawrence was in a lot of lineups this year. He finished the last half of the season. He could really reliably be started for you. Last year, as a rookie, if you took him at 101, it was an absolute abject train wreck. So NFL wise and fantasy wise. So that didn't, in year one, you spent that pick on quarterback and it got you absolutely nowhere. Now you could say, well, it got me a high pick this year. Congratulations. 2 years straight of non-contending. I don't think that's what anyone's going for. You almost deserve.
Some people will go for that.
I know, but you almost deserve like QB 6 and ADP plus, top running back or whatever it is, because that gives you a chance of getting back on track. But many times that doesn't happen. But it reminds me that, again, the proper process, and I think that I just pulled it out, but the Josh Allen, Daniel Jones kind of thing, there's a wide range of doing the right thing and the process versus results. And like you said, you double down, you triple down, you keep doing your research, you keep having the same process because it does work out. And that's why the portfolio method of, just because it didn't work out on team 7 for Jordan doesn't mean in team 11 and 13 and 4 it didn't work out. So you have to really look at refining your process, but but you have to separate that from the results of that's why you always do things that are like blind studies, right? Of like, would you take this as a result, or like, what do you think about this running back profile? And it's without the names because we get so blinded, and that can impact our results. You suddenly say running back X name, and we have built up positive or negative feelings based on the player name and not necessarily about the career arc or what the result has been from said rookie pick.
Yeah, the whole profile thing. That's why honestly, like, we talk about profiles over players. Like, when you look at some of these things, I put out in a couple of different blind tests. Would the Josh Jacobs numbers, right, with what he did through the first 4 years of his career, would you accept that as being acceptable for Bijan Robinson? About 75% of people said, like, it's either good or very good or better, basically. When you put Josh Jacobs there, all of a sudden it's a negative split. Right, when you actually put the name to it, it's a negative split. That's a huge that's a huge value thing. Same thing actually when you just take Barkley's points per game and the amount of games that he played, and you put Jacobs' points per game and the amount of games he played. Jacobs played 16 points, scored 16.7 points over 60 games in the first 4 years of his career. Barkley 18 points, so 1.3 points more per game, but played 44 games, so basically a full season shorter than Jacobs played. Right, a lot of people, a good solid majority went in the direction of Jacobs. When you put their names next to them, people take Barkley, right? So you just kind of look at those things, which again, you talk about process, you talk about sort of trying to, your mind can trick itself, right, into believing things that aren't actually true or that you just feel. But when you sort of take yourself out of it, it can be really helpful. But I think the other thing there is like just understanding that, kind of doing the right thing can be right, and it can be totally unpopular for reasons that are completely nonsensical, right? That just are, I don't like this player, right? It doesn't even really understand, here's the reasons why, or they're not even actual reasons. They're just feelings, right? And I think that's an interesting lesson to take from all of this.
Absolutely. Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 138 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I want to remind you that it's 12 months a year in terms of Football Guys Dynasty content as well as fantasy content. It's draft season rolling right around. There's still DFS and fantasy contests going on in the NFL postseason. So you want to give us credit. You want to go over there. You want to get all the information because it's a 12-month-a-year business building out your dynasty winners. You want to go over to footballguys.com/dynasty winners. You can start your 12-month membership today. Various different price points and different options for the content you want, but just know you're covered all the way through the 2023 season, and you get the entire offseason covered and get started now. Let's go over to some dynasty trades. We got some fun ones this week, and I actually wanted to start with a 101 deal, since there we are talking about Josh Jacobs was a common 101 pick years ago. Approach as we enter later January here is Bijan Robinson and a one quarterback for sure, looking like the 101. And here we are, non-PPR one quarterback, Derrick Henry, and 107 for 101.
This is a cheap 101. That seems like a really cheap 101 for Derrick, for a pick that's going first round of startups in this format, right? That seems like a really cheap 101. You're resetting the clock. You're not going to get
29 to 21, right?
Right. And what are you going to get? Hopefully some sort of day 2 running back or a first round wide receiver in that range. I mean, this is a smash.
And the unfortunate thing, the unfortunate thing in non-PPR is running backs typically just run. You typically, as long as they have decent profiles, you're going to get a string of them to start rookie drafts. But so you may get a look at a pretty nice first round wide receiver, but it is non-PPR. But yeah, one thing I was kind of swirling around though is, Derrick Henry non-PPR, that's his format. What's one more season in the sun worth, in terms of rookie picks? So that's one thing. Not that I like that part of the deal, but I was just starting to think about it of, Derrick Henry, this is his format. Boy, you wish he would 27 instead of coming up on his 29 season. But if you do look, I'm going to, again, still taking the other side, but if you are spinning this, I mean, Derrick Henry, when you look at some of the max speeds and some of the, ancillary next gen stuff, he hasn't lost a whole lot, and the end may be coming swiftly at a certain point and it just brick walls him, but it hasn't happened yet. So he's a cyborg. And to be fair, his first 2-3 years, a little slower of a trajectory, than everyone would have liked that was drafting him pretty highly. I think it was mid-first in that 2016 draft. It was the Zeke, and then not very great results for a few years. But Derrick Henry turned out, to be a monster player mid-career, later career here. But yeah, I was almost going to ask you, Derrick Henry plus what higher pick makes that 101 worth it? Does it need to be up at the 103, 104 range?
Yeah, I mean that's one way to look at it. Maybe that's a spot where we have that conversation. I still think it's a lot. The other way I was going to look at it is like, all right, you look at keep trade cut, for example, Derrick Henry's running back 18. Stop me when I get to a running back that you would say, okay, I'll move from 101 to 107 for, right? So stop me for who you'd rather have, and you'd take the picks, the downgrade, right? Dameon Pierce, Mixon, Dobbins, Pollard, Chubb, Najee Harris. Would that tempt you to do the slide down? Ramondre Stevenson, Swift.
You know where I'm going with this, which is I always look at the prime window, and it's like if I can get the whole thing, if I get the whole 21 through, insulation period, that is a massive deal at running back. When you have pedigree on your side, and Bijan Robinson, pretty much every mock you see is a first round. So there's not really a big debate. It's more like when people do mock drafts, it's like, I don't really know where a running back's going to fit. Well, someone's going to take him. So I don't know if we really have to worry about that. But when you get 21.x and you get this string of 6 or 7 years of prime, grade A choice meat there of putting out peak seasons and projected to do so outside of injury or just being a bust, which again, those things can happen, but predicting them, good luck. And so it takes a lot. Like you mentioned, all those guys you mentioned, not really. Like,
what about so Najee Harris would be like the first one
because he's 25, right?
Right.
He's going to be 25. Right. So see, that's the problem is running back right now. It gets dicey quick.
Yeah.
Just because of who has age plus who has a profile. Like again, I like the Najee Harris profile, but he came in egregiously great, but all of a sudden he logs a couple seasons and you're like, he's how old? Right. So it's not really like Josh Jacobs came in with that profile because he came in at 21 and it's like, well, we think he's underrated. Well, he's still 23, 24. And every year you just chop off a limb, an appendage with these running backs where insulation goes out the door, projecting him ahead 2 to 3 years where you would love to do that. It's just not there. Barkley's 26 all of a sudden. So I don't know. It feels like, and I don't think anyone's really going to give up a high first plus Breece Hall or a high first plus Travis Etienne or Jonathan Taylor. And to me, that's where the list really is. Now, McCaffrey's a little bit different of a cat. So I could actually sell that one a little bit. Now, non-PPR, I don't know.
Yeah.
He still should score really well, but that's not really his most glorified format. So
Right. So all those guys I read to you. So basically Stevenson's 11. So Swift 10, that's a no for you, right?
Yeah.
Javonte Williams 9's a no. Eckler 8's a no. Jacobs at 7.
That's where it'll start being.
This is where the Barkley at 6. Etienne at 5.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get McCaffrey at 4. Right. So we're already talking like it's a big. Right. Yeah. It's then Kenneth Walker. Like I think Kenneth Walker would be interesting. You know what I mean? Like, but it's that's getting to the very, very top of the position where you're looking at it and you're like, man, like there's not a lot of people that I would take on the other side of this deal and moving down at this point, especially this point, and in this type of format, there's not as many premiums, right? So you just kind of you take the best guy.
You hammer running backs, and I guarantee you that you start looking at who wins and who gets buys and all this, and it's who's got the horses, the stampede of running backs, because quarterback is nice, having a wide receiver or two, but you have to have basically the top guy. And running back is just, can I have 4 of the top 10? And if you're flexing those options, the other teams just don't have a chance. So that's really what it is. All right, let's go to another one. We got one quarterback FFPC, Kadarius Toney, Jamison Williams, 4 Amon-Ra St. Brown, and a future 2nd and 3rd.
This is a crime on the Amon-Ra St. Brown side. Amon-Ra St. Brown's by far the best player in this deal, and you're getting picks.
and the pick makes and the format makes it worse.
Right. Honestly,
but
if
you
you
are
were to
getting 2 first rounders.
right, which you got to then keep,
Yeah.
right? First of all, you're going from
Yeah.
one keeper to
Right.
two, so you're
Yeah.
going down that way. But it's funny, you should like. I'm thinking about some rules like for a future writing thing. If you get the best player in the deal and you get an upgrade in picks, just take that side, right? Like it doesn't. It has to be some sort of crazy thing to not take that side of a deal typically. So when this happens, like that's a really easy pattern to recognize. Give me Amon-Ra St. Brown by a smashing success. Like this is a huge upgrade in terms
I
of
did read
odds.
something great in the Football Guys. It was either Twitter or Football Guys forum that Kadarius Toney, you see some of the target share figures, and
Oh, it's
the
crazy. Yeah.
targets per route and all this stuff.
Yeah.
If he puts it together, like if he puts it together on the 2023 Chiefs team, which is being cleared out, by the way, like Juju, what's his status going to be? Is Sky Moore going to step up? Are we going to see any erosion from Travis Kelce? Like Tony was a very savvy addition by the Chiefs. And if that, again, coincides, if the health and usage align with just a little bit more, then you could be cooking with something. But that still doesn't mean you take it over Amon-Ra St. Brown. I also find Jameson Williams just really interesting because he played enough to say, wanted to see more. But yet it's weird because we go into the year and we say, red shirt, right? I mean, we kind of wave it off in the summer that it's a red shirt. And we say the same thing about Deshaun Watson. But yeah, you have people for Jameson Williams and Deshaun Watson now almost penalizing them because they played and didn't play to a superstar or whatever expectation level you had. It's kind of interesting. So you didn't expect him to play or do anything. I've always said, like, playing and being out there hobbled or not 100% or not totally with it, you get penalized in Dynasty way more. The optics are just horrific versus just out of sight, out of mind, you're out for the year.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. It's because we've seen this with guys, right? Like we've seen this as a pattern where people just kind of forget about it, and you're like, oh, you put them right back in. Whereas if, like you said, if it's if you're just out of sight, out of mind, it is a thing. And the other thing too is like, I always harken back to this. Like it's easy for teams to take a guy and sort of supersede someone in pedigree, right? So this situation that happened with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams, the team gets Amon-Ra St. Brown. They get a smashing success. By the way, that's what the Bills need. Honestly, like the Bills need a smashing success like that at wide receiver.
Khalil Shakir to turn into the next coming, right?
Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you get like that, and then you come back and you get another wide receiver taken earlier than you supersede him with better pedigree. It's not a guarantee that incoming rookie is going to be better. And if you have someone that's done really elite things, that's done high level things, Amon-Ra St. Brown has an elite production profile. If you just look at it at numbers and didn't look at a picture of him, you'd be like, wow, that's something else, right? It becomes a bit the Lockett Metcalf deal, right? Where Lockett has basically for his entire career outproduced DK Metcalf, yet everyone has made Metcalf more valuable. I'm not necessarily saying that's what's happening here, but people sort of just presume that Jameson Williams can come in kind of the way that people presumed with DK Metcalf and just say, sit over there. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown's awesome, and he's kind of proven that through 2 years. So like this, you're making a really unlikely bet going in the other direction would be what I would say. And even if we do like Kadarius Toney, I think it's interesting, right? But you can't. This isn't how you make that bet, right? You make that bet in a slide down in a rookie draft. You don't make it. You don't make it for a top 5 wide receiver.
And the topper is we're in a format where a roster spot just means more.
Absolutely.
And that they were able to parlay that with future picks of just saying, we can use those for trades. We can use those for any sort of sprinkles on the top of the sundae in a future trade or whatever. But the fact that you shed a roster spot, which Tony could work out, Jameson Williams works out, but you got to make that a part of your keep 14 for right now. So that's the unfortunate part, that if you're that light that they're significant no-brainer upgrades and you're taking on 2 wide receivers and all this suboptimal stuff, then you're probably not in the greatest position anyway. And then you just did that and, I got to build up depth. Not really an FFPC. Like that shouldn't be a billboard sign that you should be proud of and putting your ink on the corner. Like that's not a thing. So yeah, the fact that you can do it in this format. Like you said, you get the best player and you get some picks. Like just when in doubt, say yes. And this is almost like this is also a blind resume thing, right? I mean, if you looked at this, you're like, well, you got a first round wide receiver that finished at wide receiver 100 or something as a rookie in adjusted points per game, and then you've got a guy that already early in his rookie contract as a first round guy got traded, and someone that when you look at just a points per game basis hasn't really been on any sort of success track. You trade those two guys for, like you said, a guy that's monopolized targets and done what Amon-Ra St. Brown has done. Like, take away the names. Like, it's a no-brainer. No one sends the offer.
Right.
If anything, it's the Tony Jameson Williams second, third, something else for Amon-Ra. Like, that's what the trade looks like.
Right.
If anything, that's what it looks like.
Can we just go? I just want to go to a place with you, which we don't typically go to, which is we're on team day 3 wide receivers, which typically isn't a place we do, but we do like them when they've been productive in the NFL. What's a reasonable place?
Not just productive, when they've been hyper
productive.
Yeah, see, here's the thing that I was kind of surprised. Like, I thought when I started running comps and like looking at, adding player value spectrum to like Isaiah Hodgins, for example, or, guys like Richie James or whatever, it's like, oh, that's a really nice season. They really, posted and showed some good things. And then you look at what a train wreck historically it still is, because they didn't get all the way home. You tap them on their head. You're like, Tim, that's a great job. You did good things. But what's going to happen? I'm just going to tell you. So February through May is not going to be pretty for you, because we know that you are not the yellow brick road to the end of the prize here. Right. So we're going to add significantly to your depth chart. So you're going to go right back to running to wide receiver 3, 4, 5. Just letting you know that wide receiver 1 gravy train not happening anymore. You're probably not going to ever do that again. And yet your peak season was like wide receiver 55. Yep. So that's what happens. So when we say productive early on, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you have to blow it out of the water. You have to do Stephon Diggs. You have to do Amon-Ra St. Brown. You've got to do historic level stuff, and then you maintain. Then you throw the pedigree out the window. But some Isaiah Hodgins story, you do not throw historics out the window and say, well, this is it. He's it. He's the one. No, he's not the one. He's one of many, and most of them just fade right back into dust.
How high is too high to start the Amon-Ra St. Brown conversation in Dynasty rankings?
How high is too high? I feel like this is dreadfully inappropriate, seeing that we play this game with Patrick Mahomes. How high is too high? I
say at 3. If I say that you can talk about him at 3, what's your reaction to that?
I can't go there. If you want to start at 4, I view that as absolutely acceptable.
Is AJ Brown your 3?
No. I have Jalen Waddle at 3.
Okay, that's fair.
And yeah, so I have him. I will say wide receiver 4 for me through a decent chunk is all one tier. So he's definitely in that next group. I can argue a few different ways. I think it's tough with them being 29. I think it's tough to have Tyreek Hill or Stephon Diggs, no matter how successful they've been. I think at 29, with some of these other guys that have been productive at 23 through 25, I think it's a really tough sell to have those guys that high. Because I still think a 29-year-old wide receiver in the top 10 to 12 is still pretty high. I mean, I think considering the lens that you're not on, if you have productive track guys younger, you kind of need to go that way, I think. So
yeah, I'm with you. It's like, I was looking at it because like Lamb by the market is 3, and I was like,
yeah,
I'm like looking at it and I'm like, what's the argument? Like, there's definitely, but it's interesting because we've gotten to a spot where the wide receiver position is actually younger. Like, it might be the top 10 might be as young as I ever remember it. Right. We're probably going back to maybe 2014, but like it's very, very young top 10 guys, which actually is curious to me in terms of, does it actually sort of down weight? Like, one lesson that you could take from the last couple of years is like, hey, wide receivers coming out have been really good. Maybe there's something there, right? Maybe we should be in on sort of young wide receivers in rookie drafts. I think you could take the total opposite view of it too, which is like, hey, why would I sort of take this, right? If I want to spend 102, 103, 104, something like that on a wide receiver, I might as well just go spend that on one of the top guys that exists, right? Because there's not as much, you can't sort of get that you're hitting a lot harder ceiling of going up, right? Than you were 5 years ago, right? Or even 2 years ago, right? When Waddle comes in and all of a sudden, breaks the bank, he can go way up, where if someone does that now, it's a lot harder to get that high because there's so much young competition there.
Yeah, and that's kind of at quarterback. We say that, right? I mean, are you challenging Mahomes? Are you beating Josh Allen in a season? I mean, like, so it could be really easy to go, oh yeah, top 6. They have a top 6 upside. Well, that's nice in a vacuum to just say things, but it's who are you competing against right now in the NFL and in Dynasty to get there? And like what you're saying is the same sort of thing at wide receiver, where you go, okay. So a 22-year-old coming in, let's say, let's say this year Traylon Burks produces really well, or let's say you get a graphic uptick from Christian Watson or whatever. Like, they're not going to have a tactical advantage with age, because there's so many guys that are still not discounted with age that are firmly in their mid-20s. And frankly, you shouldn't really worry about it. If a guy's 22 or 25, it's all young enough. It's all great. And, unless they start getting a lot older, then it's really a non-factor, in my opinion. So you don't have the shooting comet coming in and having as much of an edge from the phenom standpoint. We can almost call it the phenom rule. So at times when you have an older position, but one thing I was noticing is I don't have in my top 10 dynasty wide receivers, every single one of them has been a wide receiver 1 in their career. And I think it's really easy. And this is like I mentioned, I mean, I add things to my spreadsheets all the time just to be nice little reminders for me when I'm doing these studies and all this stuff. And I want to move this guy up. But when you start looking, you're like, well, the guy's played 2 years and he hasn't been higher than wide receiver 20 or 30. Like, you gotta be super careful about vaulting that guy to the moon and say, why am I doing this? And we said before, blind resume. If you just sit there and say, well, the name's not there. Okay, this is their pedigree. They played 2 years. They've been wide receiver, 18 and 14. Okay, that's awesome. But you can't. I think there's a ceiling there of how high you can have them with realistic. Like, you have to put the whole ball together. So I just, like, for example, like, you can really like Drake London. He finished at wide receiver 46 this year, and it's not. Again, that's promising. He showed a lot of promising things, and when you combine that with his pedigree, he's on a track that could become successful. But keep in mind, you start downgrading pedigree a little bit. You start downgrading, well, they finished at wide receiver 60, and they were, you start getting into this Elijah Moore thing of like, bad things can happen, and be really careful. And I think it's easy for folks to get to wide receiver 20 and go, I can't take an old guy. I just can't do it. And what happens is you take the young guy and they never get home. And yet you take Mike Evans and you just plug along, you start hitting doubles. And that guy was going to be your wide receiver 3 or 4 in a team build or for lineup purposes anyway. So, I mean, I guess Elijah Moore working out would have been tremendous. I mean, he takes a step forward. They don't draft Garrett Wilson. Things are glorious. He builds upon his rookie season. But the downside, as you're seeing, is just invisibility.
Right.
Mike Evans, the odds of Mike Evans, if you took him last offseason, going invisible was almost 0.
Right.
Almost 0. And then, and wouldn't you say, Jordan, that the outcome with them drafting Garrett Wilson, I'm not going to say it's 0, but the odds are significantly lower that Elijah Moore works out. Because you had questionable.
He's been superseded.
Well, you had questionable quarterback, but you had a graphic difference in pedigree. This wasn't like they took somebody at 29 overall.
Right.
They took him top 10.
Right.
And again, the odds of the round 2 guy sustaining and saying go sit over there, top 10 pick.
Yeah.
It's just, and with the questionable quarterback where 2 guys aren't going to live. This isn't Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins. They're not going to survive.
Right.
One's going to eat the other. This is Hunger Games. It's not going to work out. Who's going to get eaten? It's Elijah almost every time. Okay, we got sidetracked big time. All right.
We did get sidetracked.
Let's clarify this. This is it's okay.
This has been like
it's
a counseling show.
It's been a counseling
exactly.
show.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, so 1 quarterback FFPC. We got 204 Tyler Allgeier for a 24 first.
Take the 2020 the first. Take the first.
If you can't get a first for Tyler Allgeier, what type of exit would you be looking for?
Cross positional upgrade. So I'd look for, can I go running back and a wide receiver to jump up a wide receiver tier? Can I include him in a bigger deal for a quarterback and super flex? Right? Can I go? I hesitate to say this because these aren't the types of trades that you should lead with. But if you're in a premium tight end format, can you package 2 tight ends to really move up? And when I mean really move up, I mean really move up, not just I go from Dalton Schultz or from Cole Kmet to Dalton Schultz. Like you need to actually jump up, right? You need to actually elevate yourself, right? Jump from Cole Kmet to Dallas Goedert or Kittle or something like that type of trade that actually moves the needle. Those would be sort of the things that I would think about, because I think just selling him for a second is kind of capitulating, and like it's kind of what you spent for him. Like it's actually decent so far, right? Like he's proven to be that he's viable, right? This isn't a Tyrion Davis Price situation, and I think he's got outs for 2023 to be a player. So you don't just capitulate, but it's got to be a meaningful upgrade. Otherwise, I'm not selling for like a late second. I think that's really bad process. Yeah.
That said, there is risk. That said, in FFPC, we know in general, get the first. The first have a lot of liquidity. The first make a team pretty valuable, whether or not they're contending. But seconds, thirds, whatever else, just get them when, I mean, they don't do a whole lot, to be fair, because they're so close to the roster line. And I would even argue Tyler Allgeier a year ago, or when you drafted him, was right there on your roster fringe. Now, as the season progressed, he moved up from there and he became an auto keeper, for the cut line this offseason. He has outs to be the starter, outs to be a week 1 starter in your lineup. But you are to a point where that's a roster spot you free up for possibly a Tyler Allgeier this year. Is that an Alexander Madison type? So there's not really a big, it's weird to say, but Tyler Allgeier in FFPC has not much latitude before he's not a keeper or a guy that you get to week 7 and you're like, is he really better than that running back 2 on another depth chart? I can, because Atlanta drafted somebody and all of a sudden just the landscape looks different. So it's a pretty thin line. And all of a sudden we're sitting here in January and you have outs to get a first. So you take that because again, you're trading 204, which let's face it. I mean, you're looking at probably ancillary running back, which might be available in the 7th round of your draft, might be available on the waiver wire in September. So got to be careful.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I ran some numbers really quick while we were talking on Amon-Ra St. Brown. In terms of yards per route run, and I think this goes back to 2008, 96th percentile. In terms of targets per route run, that's 25.25% of his routes he's been targeted on, 98th percentile. When you look at actually PFF receiving grade, 99th career percentile. So you're talking about an elite profile. That's the ones we get excited from day 3.
Yep. And don't overthink it. And again, it's a high bar. So this is not someone finishing at wide receiver 57. You've got to instantly, and that's typically what happens from day 3. They instantly proclaim themselves, you underdrafted me. And we saw that very early with some of the key examples. All right, we got last trade this week. 10-team 2 quarterback. So recalibrate, not a typical format here, but we have Tee Higgins being acquired for 106, 207, and 301. And the methodology here, I think, is as important as assessing the trade, because this is a team cashing in some picks. They have a truckload of firsts. So also, in addition to this deal, Jordan, let's talk through, they have most of the first round.
Mhm.
So how would you be looking to build out a team that probably has a long way to go, of getting core players and spending the picks via trading, whether it's for players, future, drafting a few, but this is how they spent one of their first rounders in this 10-team format.
I have 7 first-round picks. There's no excuse not to have Allen and Mahomes on this team. Right. I mean, or Allen and Herbert, but 2 of the top
guys,
5 guys, whoever they are, 2 of the top 3. Like, there's no excuse.
You're assuming that they're dealing. You're assuming that they're open for business.
You would be amazed at some of the trades that we see for these guys.
Trade 101, 104, and 108. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, you got them. Like, you should see some of the stuff, and some of the people I've been posting some trades that we've seen. Like, I've been inspired, Chad. I will go out and I will offer things that seem absolutely ludicrous to me and get accepted. We should do a quick game of Did You Get Enough Of? I wouldn't start here, right? I mean, if you have this many picks, you've got holes at quarterback. There's no possible way, right? Because you probably earned 101, right? Like, I'm assuming this team has holes at quarterback. So what you've done is you've said, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a non-premium position with these premium picks. This is a way you get yourself in trouble. This is a way you're constantly rebuilding. I do not like this as a starting point. Shoot for the moon, right? If you want to go get a wide receiver, go offer for Justin Jefferson. Go offer for Chase, because it's a 10-teamer too. So you even need more elite players, right? Like I think that this is aimed. I don't necessarily hate the idea of trading the picks for veterans. I hate the way that this is done.
Right, because you're saying you're probably to some extent starting from scratch, and because you don't get that many picks. And you have a good skeleton. Like, you don't have 2 of the top 15 quarterbacks in this scenario, in iterations. So I think, and while it's only 1 pick, what you're saying is you spent a bullet when you don't know how many bullets it's gonna take to build out the things that matter the most.
Correct.
And so, so knock on those doors. Start with Mahomes. You go to Allen, you go to Burrow, you go to Herbert, whatever, your hierarchy is of those top tier or 2 of quarterbacks. And like you said, I mean, those doors are more open than you would expect by just throwing picks. Just throwing. It's like the dollars, right? You just, okay, how many? You just start writing the check. You're like, am I writing enough?
Right.
Am I writing enough zeros? Like, when people they want to develop a certain real estate, like, we gotta buy this, apartment complex because we're gonna turn it into high-rise condos, and like we're gonna bulldoze your place, we're just gonna keep offering. Maybe if you say no now, we're gonna offer again next year. Like, so you just keep doing it and keep going. Is that enough? Is that a zero? Is that a zero? Because we're gonna get this done. And so, because if you exited, what was it, 7 picks? So if you have 7 picks, and let's say you end up with 2 elite quarterbacks and you have 1 first left. Good offseason, right?
If you have 2 elite quarterbacks and 1 first left, you're probably going to make the playoffs.
Right. Well, and what you're saying is apt, which is a 10-team league. It's about the horses. It's about the studs. So like, you sitting there, and it's like having Tee Higgins as your wide receiver 2. Yeah, great. Golf clap for you. Is that really going to matter in a 10-teamer? No.
Right. And the other thing, can we play a quick game of Did You Get Enough Of? Some of these are amazing. Actually, let's start you with an easy one. George Pickens 102, a 2024 first and a 2025 second for Mahomes.
No, stop.
Right. So again, that stuff exists. So to just to just poo-poo the idea of like, you can't get these guys for these picks. Like, these
by exist. George Pickens, did you mean Jamar Chase? I'm just asking for a friend.
And by the pick, did you mean Justin Jefferson too? Here's one that I found fascinating. I have a specific take on this, but it's Fields Burks 103, 101, and a couple of later picks. That's sufficient to know for basically Josh Allen, Jacobs, Etienne, in London. right? So you're kind of, there's a lot going on there.
There's a lot to there, but yeah.
Yeah, I basically kind of boiled it down to like it's Fields and we'll say 101 for ETN in London was kind of how I went about the math of it.
Sure.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm like, that is you run over even the cutest, most adorable toddler. You run them over to accept that trade, right? Like, when they're behaving well, right? Like you still run them over to get them. I mean, it's a wild, like just some of the trades that you can do with picks. Like people get crazy. And if it doesn't happen today, just wait until the Senior Bowl starts. Wait until guys start running in spandex, right? It's going to be, there will be a national, the arousal level on rookie picks never gets higher than when guys are running without shirts on in spandex.
Just wait until outrageous. Bryce Young is holding 2 gallons of milk and weighs in at 201. Just you wait. When it's rumored that he might, when you round up, be 5'11 and a half. Just you wait. It's going to be 101 and turning around franchises. That's what's going to happen here.
Yeah. It's going to be weird seeing him weigh in a trench coat and be like, "You going to take that off?" No, because he's got a weight vest on underneath.
Exactly.
Exercise vest.
Exactly. He's been up since 3 a.m. He's just been drinking. We have. I can't go there. Never mind. Sorry, Joe. In advance. Sorry, Joe. I'm not even going to say it. All right. So that does it for the trades this week. A lot of good ones. I thought there was a ton of meat to the bone on those strategy ones. I thought this was an interesting one. Quote coming out of the Footballguys Dynasty Forum, which is Dynasty in a nutshell. Someone wrote Justin Jefferson, tier break, another tier break, a third tier break, Chase, AJ Brown, Jonathan Taylor, etc. Like, what is your thinking in terms of, and they broke down, why for them Jamar Chase is not, even in the same tier as Justin Jefferson. What's your take on that?
I think they're in the same tier. Like if you want to pick between them, I think that's fine. Like if you want to say Chase is above Jefferson, I would take Jefferson above Chase just because I think the volume's a little bit greater. I think you have a little bit more outs with Jefferson, but I wouldn't necessarily argue if someone took Chase over him. I think they belong close enough together. I'd be really interested, and maybe I'll have to go back and look about why they're separated.
Yeah, it was a lot more of the granular stuff of just, and part of it was going back to the targets, and there's some, stuff that isn't quite as predictable with Chase kind of replicating enough of the production. One thing I would say though is don't downgrade the quarterback solidity. That the Chase Burrow combination, the fact that that's probably going to be tied up for the foreseeable future, and Justin Jefferson, not that you can't overcome quarterback play, it just makes your life a heck of a lot easier. So so even if you have Jefferson ahead, I think it brings Chase up, just the fact that you're probably tied together, in that combination for a while, and more than, sorry, Kirk Cousins, but just you don't have the same trajectory and the same allegiance or career lifespan quality years remaining as the Cincinnati duo has. So
yeah, Jefferson's basically the 100th percentile. So he's at 2.62 yards per route run. That's the 100th percentile. He's at 25.01 yards per. He's actually behind AJ or behind Amon-Ra St. Brown in that. He's 98th percentile in that. He's got a 100th percentile PFF career score. So Chase, for his part, 98th percentile yards per route run, 92nd percentile targets per route run, and 98th percentile PFF grade. Like it's really high. Jefferson's better to date.
Yeah. One thing that really kind of my brain had to tick over in a different direction, because I can't think of the last time I did a 1 quarterback startup draft or really kind of coach somebody through one of those environments. And thinking back through it, I'm like, round 1 has a whole different feel to me if there's no quarterback premiums going on. Like you sit there and you're like, well, if it's not Jefferson and Chase, like you're kind of sitting here, it's the John Travolta. You're going, why am I here?
Right.
Like that was my first initial thought in 2023 startups. I was like, 1 quarterback. If I'm not getting one of those 2 guys, how do I feel about this?
Right. Is ETN going like 109?
If it's a soft market to trade down in a super flex, what do you think it is if you're sitting there at 105?
Right.
And then those two juggernauts are gone in a stock format. Like what What's the market like?
Yeah.
Give you a future second to move down to 202.
Right.
Like, what? It must be wildly, wildly cheap to try
Right.
to just bail out. Because
Yeah.
what are you gonna do? It's flat stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
good luck. Good luck getting that right. All right. Last one I got here. I think back to Michael Carter showing out and then not getting and then getting replaced by Brees Hall in the following draft. And that was alluding to just day 3 running backs. You know, they can show some promise, but pedigree and a whole offseason of options, they're gonna come get you.
Yeah, it's in my edition of AOD this year, I talk about reimagining the offseason, and that's one of the things, right? Flipping the calendar. And one of the things is looking at survival rates, looking at threat rates, which are basically, you know, the odds that someone is selected over you. For historically, for 5th round guys, which is what Allgeier, I believe Allgeier was mid 5th round. For 5th round guys, 38% of them have a running back selected over him the following year. And you got to sort of lean towards the fact that there's a lot of 5th round guys that aren't walking in as the running back 1 on their team. So even for Allgeier, like, that's a pretty dangerous, like, that number actually leans worse for him than it would, you know, if, I don't know, Tyler Allgeier was drafted behind Nick Chubb, right? Like, he's much less likely to be superseded in that case. He's much more likely to be superseded here. So there's a lot of risk there, even though he was good, but there's a lot of risk. And that's a position where it's a lot tougher to survive that, right? You can survive it at wide receiver because you can be Amon-Ra St. Brown and be dominant. There's not the opportunity to really do that as much at running back. So that's one of the hard things you run into.
Yeah. And the last point I'll make is, you know, looking at these running back depth charts, first of all, we get some notable names out there, especially this year in free agency, which doesn't even factor that in. You know, it's a harder thing to track in terms of contracts given out. And sometimes that happens all the way into the summer, that you can still get a scare and someone that's a legitimate threat, as you said. But the other point I would make is you almost want the depth chart to be strong enough. And I don't think Atlanta is strong enough. And that's always a dangerous thing because you look at it like, for example, Dalvin Cook, if you were ever worried about Dalvin Cook per se, well, you're like, well, Madison's been good enough. So they have no need. And so that's the perfect scenario where you have, well, number 2 is good enough, but not a threat. That's the perfect scenario. Now, Tyler Allgeier, you say, older Cordero Patterson. What else do they have? The answer is not much. Like, they need to add to the position in some capacity. Do you really think that the addition is going to be some 6th rounder, some 1-year deal? You know, I mean, how low does it have to be free agency wise to say, not concerned? But the point is, you look at that depth chart and you go, use logical testing and say, if you were the Falcons, would you add a running back this offseason? And the answer is usually yes. So why wouldn't you add something? Would you rather add something? This is like Sesame Street. Better or worse? Like, are we trying to make our team better or worse? You know, that even if you think Allgeier is great, you'd still rather have better running backs than worse running backs. Because we're not talking about you, within the prism of like $2 million or less, you can still find better or worse. So I just, that's the part for me. You want the depth chart to be good enough to where you don't think that they would make a move. But that's the problem in Atlanta. Just this one example is that it's not good enough. And you could have said the same thing about the Jets, right? It was not good enough. And all of a sudden, what do? Splash the pot. We're sitting there, best player available, Brees Hall. Okay. We're in, and that changes everything. So
it's funny you sort of come all the way around on that. They did what the Bills and some of these other teams can't do. They went and just kept doubling down. The Jets did because they had a quarterback on a rookie deal. Now they know it didn't work, but they had that cap flexibility, right? That the Bills don't have. They could draft Hall. They could double down at wide receiver. Corey Davis, even underperforming, his contract was still acceptable. Like, all those things that you could do, right? Like, Atlanta's in the same position, right? Like, they don't have much. They have a ton of room. So Tyler Allgeier is a very dangerous. I think the Michael Carter comp for him is a really good one.
I almost wonder, as you said that, I almost wonder if there's 2 ways. So we talked about how you have this window for a rookie contract quarterback, and then you can do everything in your power to build around. I almost wonder, because you mentioned the Jets, you mentioned Atlanta. These are teams that have some promising rookie contract stuff going on, maybe around a quarterback, but they don't have the quarterback. So I almost wonder, are those the situations where you say their window could actually be acquiring a quarterback closer to market value, where you say they did enough right rookie contract or insulation wise, low money around it, but you pop in a already good to go couple year window, whatever it is, veteran quarterback, you're doing it in reverse. But I almost wonder if that's a template that we see over the next few years. Something like that works out if quarterbacks really are more on the move. So we haven't seen that template really work out yet. That's a new one. that's a hybrid. That's reversey. That's the mirror image. We'll see. I still think the rookie contract, you get up to 101, you get a high first quarterback working out. That's going to be the 1.0. Everyone wants to see that one. And then you can just spend. Spend. We'll call that the Brock Purdy principle. You just get your seventh rounder right. Get your seventh round quarterback right. Have a coach that can transcend a lot, and then all of a sudden life becomes easy.
Yeah.
All right. In this episode, we discussed a lot about dynasty trading. We discussed about contending windows, both for dynasty, both for NFL teams, and we discussed about survivorship. We competition rate. We talked about pedigree, Amon-Ra St. Brown among them, and how to spend. What if you have a truckload of first round picks on your dynasty team you're looking to build out? We also discussed that in the trading section. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty